There's a photograph on my phone that I have never deleted and cannot explain why. It was taken at my boyfriend's 26th birthday dinner. The whole group of us crowded around a long table, laughing at something I can't remember anymore. Noah is in the center, birthday boy, arm around me, grinning the way he always grinned, wide open, no reservation. And standing at the far left of that photo, beer in hand, looking directly at the camera with a half smile, is Caleb. His best friend since they were 14 years old. The man I spent the following 4 months lying to Noah about. Every time I think I'm ready to delete that photo, I look at Noah's face in it, and I can't. Before you judge me, tell me where you're watching from, because I have sat inside this story long enough to know that it doesn't begin where most people assume it begins. It doesn't begin with attraction or opportunity or a moment of weakness. It begins much earlier, in the quiet, accumulating unhappiness that I didn't have the courage to name out loud. Stay with me. Drop a comment and let me know where you are in the world, and be honest with yourself as I talk. Because the part of this story that I'm most ashamed of isn't the part you're probably expecting. Noah and I had been together for 2 years and 7 months when everything fell apart. We had met through a shared friend group at 23, started dating 3 months later, and by the time we hit the 1-year mark, we had fallen into the kind of relationship that looks, from the outside, exactly like what everyone is supposed to want. We were stable. We were comfortable. We showed up to every birthday party, every group dinner, every holiday gathering as a unit. People referred to us as a unit. Noah and Sienna, said together like one word. And I think that was part of the problem. Somewhere in the comfort, I had stopped being a separate person with separate needs. I had become half of a unit, and the unit looked fine, so I told myself I was fine. Noah was not a cruel man. I need to say that clearly, and I need to say it first, because what I did could make him sound like the villain in his own story, and he was not. He was good-natured, socially confident, the kind of person that rooms warm to immediately. He was generous with his time and his money and his laughter. He loved me in the way he knew how to love, which was openly, casually, with the easy confidence of someone who had never really had to doubt whether he was loved back. That confidence, though, that was the quiet gap between us. Noah loved me without ever seeming to wonder if I was okay. He assumed I was okay because I was there, because I kept showing up. And I kept showing up, so he kept assuming, and the circle continued, and the gap between what I was feeling and what I was communicating grew wider and wider until I could no longer see across it clearly. I had tried, earlier in the relationship, to talk about it. "Sometimes I feel like you don't actually check in with me," I said one evening. "Like you assume I'm fine and move on." Noah had frowned, not defensively, genuinely puzzled. "You always seem fine." "I know, but sometimes I'm not, and I want you to ask even when I seem like I am." He nodded, kissed my forehead, said, "Okay, I hear you," and then, slowly, gradually, returned to assuming I was fine. I don't think he did that deliberately. That's the thing about patterns, they're largely unconscious. He had a way of existing in relationships that had probably always worked before, because most people don't require more than what Noah offered. I apparently did, and I was too afraid of seeming high maintenance or too needy to keep pushing for what I needed. So I went quiet. I performed fine, and the resentment built like water behind a wall. Caleb had been in our lives since before Noah and I were even together. He was Noah's oldest friend. They had grown up on the same street, gone to the same school, chosen different universities, but maintained the kind of friendship that survives distance and time because it was built on something genuine. He was quieter than Noah, more observant, the kind of person who said less, but listened more carefully. In a room full of people, Noah would be the center of it, and Caleb would be near the edge, paying attention to everything Noah missed. For 2.5 years, I had thought of Caleb as simply part of the landscape of my relationship with Noah. He was there at every gathering, warm and familiar, the kind of presence you stop registering consciously because it has always been there. We had easy conversations, the occasional inside joke, the comfortable shorthand of people who have been in each other's orbits long enough to skip the surface-level small talk. I had never once thought of him in any other way. The shift happened so gradually that I could not point to a single moment and say, "There, that's where it started." It was more like a slow expose. You're like a photograph developing in a darkroom. You don't see it happening. And then suddenly the image is clear, and you can't remember it not existing. The first thing I really noticed, was how differently he listened. I had been saying something at a group dinner one evening, something fairly ordinary about a frustrating situation at work, and Noah had glanced at his phone mid-sentence. Not rudely, not intentionally, just reflexively, the way people do. And across the table, Caleb had looked at me directly, with the specific quality of attention that means someone is actually present, and when I finished he said, "That sounds genuinely exhausting. How are you doing with it?" It was a small thing, a normal, decent human thing, but I had not been asked how I was doing, really asked, with actual interest, in longer than I could comfortably remember. And I sat with the feeling that small question produced in me, privately long after dinner was over. I told myself it was nothing, that I was reading too much into basic courtesy. But I thought about it for 3 days. The first real boundary I crossed was a conversation I should not have had. Not because the content was inappropriate. We talked about books, about a documentary he'd been watching, about a mutual frustration with how the friend group sometimes operated. But I had it on a Tuesday afternoon, via text, while sitting in the apartment I shared with Noah, and I didn't mention it to Noah when he came home. I had an instinct that I should mention it, and I made a choice not to, and that choice was the first brick. The texts continued, slowly at first, then with more frequency, then with a depth that had no business existing in a friendship with my boyfriend's best friend. He would ask me things, real things, the kind of questions that require actual answers, and I would answer them more honestly than I was answering almost anything in my actual relationship. What was I afraid of? What did I actually want from my life? Did I feel like Noah and I were as aligned as we seemed? That last question gave me pause. I looked at it on my screen for a long time. "Sometimes I think we've stopped growing in the same direction," I typed back. "But I don't know how to say that to him without it becoming a bigger conversation than I'm ready to have." There was a pause. Then Caleb wrote, "Maybe that bigger conversation is the one you actually need." I knew he was right. I also knew that I was having the conversation I needed to have with Noah's best friend instead of with Noah. I registered the wrongness of that clearly, and I kept going anyway. That is something I have had to be very honest about in the years since. I cannot claim I didn't know. I knew. I chose comfort and understanding over correctness, and I kept choosing it, small decision by small decision, until the small decisions added up to something irreversible. The first time something crossed from emotional into physical territory, we were both at a mutual friend's housewarming. Noah had left early work obligations the following morning, and I had stayed, and so had Caleb, and at the end of the night we ended up as the last 2 people on the back porch, the party winding down around us, and we talked for 2 hours in the dark. About everything. About nothing. About the specific sadness of feeling lonely inside a life that looks complete. "Do you ever feel like you're performing a version of yourself that isn't fully accurate?" I asked. I wasn't even sure where the question came from. It just arrived. He was quiet for a moment. Then, more often than I'd like to admit, I think most people do. "Does Noah?" I asked. Caleb looked at me steadily. "You know him better than I do by now." "That's not really an answer." "No," he said, "it isn't." At the end of the night, walking to our separate cars in the cold, he stopped and turned to me and said, "For what it's worth, Sienna, you're not as invisible as you think you are. Not to everyone." I drove home and sat in the driveway and cried. Not because of what had happened. Because of how much I had needed to hear something that simple, and because the person who had said it was the exact wrong person to have said it. What followed over the next 2 months was a sustained act of self-deception that I am not proud of. I told myself repeatedly that it was just friendship, that I was being careful, that nothing serious was happening. Meanwhile, I was rearranging my schedule to create opportunities for us to be in the same room. I was crafting explanations in advance for how I would describe my whereabouts to Noah. I was doing the quiet, meticulous work of someone who is deceiving someone they love, while telling themselves they are not. The fear of being caught existed as a constant background noise. Every time Noah mentioned Caleb casually, Caleb and I are watching the game Thursday. Or, Caleb asked if we wanted to join them for dinner Saturday. I would feel a spike of cold anxiety and manage it with careful, practiced calm. I became very good at the surface. Too good. The ease of it frightened me. There was one evening where Noah was on the phone with Caleb in the next room, and I sat on the couch and listened to Noah laugh at something Caleb said, the deep, open laugh that I loved about him, the laugh he gave to the people he trusted most, and I felt something close to physical pain. Not guilt exactly. Something worse than guilt. The specific grief of seeing something beautiful that you are in the process of destroying. I almost told him that night. I sat across from him after he'd hung up, and I opened my mouth, and what came out was, "You okay? You seem tired." And he said, "Yeah, long week. You okay?" And I said, "Fine." The turning point came on a Saturday morning when Noah borrowed my phone to look up a restaurant. His battery had died. I wasn't in the room. I had left it unlocked. When I came back, he was sitting very still at the kitchen table, my phone face up in his hand, with the particular stillness of someone who has just seen something that has rearranged the world. He didn't say anything at first. He just looked at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before. Not anger. Confusion. The raw, undefended confusion of someone who is trying to reconcile two incompatible things. "What is this?" he said. His voice was very quiet. I looked at the screen. A message from Caleb, the kind that left no room for alternative interpretation. The kind I should never have allowed to exist. I sat down. "Noah, is this real?" "Yes." "How long?" "A few months." He put the phone down. He pressed both hands flat on the table, the way you do when you're trying to ground yourself in something solid. "Caleb," he said, not a question, like he was testing the word, trying to understand how it had become part of a sentence like this one. "Noah, I'm so." "Don't," he said, very flat, "not right now." He stood up and he left the apartment, and he walked for what I later found out was 4 hours, alone in the city. And I sat in the kitchen, and I did not move for most of that time, because there was nowhere to move to and nothing to do with my hands. Here is the secondary thing that happened, the thing I had not anticipated. Caleb called me that evening, not to comfort me, to tell me that he had already called Noah, that he had decided, before Noah had even come home to find out, that he was going to tell him, that he had been trying to build the courage to do it for 2 weeks. "You were going to tell him," I said. "I couldn't keep it from him. He's my best friend for 12 years, Sienna. I couldn't." And sitting with that, I understood something I hadn't let myself understand before. Whatever Caleb and I had built together in those months, whatever honesty and depth and connection I had told myself was real and meaningful, Caleb had been in pain about it the entire time. He had not been untouched. He had been drowning in it, trying to figure out how to do right by someone he loved more than he had been doing right by either of us. I had thought, in my more self-protecting moments, that what existed between Caleb and me was mutual and clear-eyed. What I understood in that phone call was that it had cost him something enormous, and I had been too absorbed in my own emotional experience to fully see that. Noah did not come back that night. He stayed with a friend. When he came back the following morning, he was composed in the way that means someone has been up all night choosing how to be. He said, "I need you to be honest with me about everything, not the version that makes you look better, the real version." And I told him all of it. The texts, the conversations, the slow, deliberate accumulation of it. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "Did you love him?" I sat with that question longer than he deserved to wait. "I don't know," I finally said. "I think I loved how he made me feel. I don't know if that's the same thing." "And me?" he asked. "Did you love me?" "Yes," I said, completely and imperfectly and in a way that I handled very badly, but yes. He nodded slowly. "That almost makes it worse," he said. We ended. There was no dramatic finale, just a quiet, painful dismantling of a shared life, the division of objects and contacts and mutual friends who now had to choose or tried not to. Most of them, in the way of friend groups that fracture, took sides or simply disappeared, and the group that had been the context of my entire social life for 3 years essentially dissolved. That loss, the loss of the community, not just the relationship, was something I had not accounted for and something I have never fully recovered from in the same form. Noah and Caleb's friendship did not survive either. That was perhaps the consequence I carry the heaviest. 12 years of friendship, built on a street they had both grown up and dissolved because of something I had allowed to happen in the space between them. Caleb has told me since, in one of the few conversations we've had in the years after, that Noah has never spoken to him again. He said it without blame toward me. That almost made it harder. I am 28 now. I have had one relationship since Noah, brief and cautious and probably too guarded to have ever really worked. I'm still learning the specific skill of speaking honestly about what I need before the need becomes an emergency. I am still learning that discomfort inside a relationship is a conversation to have, not a secret to manage. I am still learning that silence is not the same as patience, and that performing fine is not the same as being fine. What I know clearly now, from the far side of all of it, is this. I did not cross the line with Caleb because of Caleb. I crossed it because I had a deficit in myself that I was too afraid to address directly, and I let it lead me somewhere I should never have gone. The connection I found in those months was real in the sense that loneliness made it feel real. But it was built on the wrong foundation, and it cost 3 people, 3 genuinely good people, including me, something significant and permanent. If you are sitting in a relationship right now where you feel unseen or unheard or quietly starving for something you can't fully name, please choose the direct conversation with your partner about what you actually need, not with the person at the edge of your life who asks better questions than the person at the center of it. The person at the edge doesn't have to live with the consequences of where that leads. You do. I know now what I should have said to Noah, sitting at that kitchen table years ago. I should have said, I need you to ask how I am even when I seem fine. And when you don't, I feel invisible. And I'm scared that invisible will become unbearable, and I'll do something with that feeling that neither of us can undo. I should have said that. It was so simple, and it would have cost almost nothing. What I chose instead cost everything. If this story stayed with you, leave something in the comments. I want to hear what you're thinking. Share it if it made you feel something, and I'll see you in the next one.